My name is Colin Zhu, and super excited to be here. Welcome, everyone. I don't see anyone's faces, so I'm just staring at myself. Um, Basically, this is my first virtual talk with WellSet, and super excited to be going into the topic that we're going to be talking about today. But a little bit about me. So I'm based in Los Angeles. I'm originally from New Jersey, and I am a double board certified family practitioner and also lifestyle medicine. And basically, I've been practicing for a good number of years. As you can see, I'm a pretty young physician, and my world pretty much revolves around wellness. My story is my mother is a Chinese medical doctor, and so I grew up in and out of her office, and she's been practicing traditional Chinese medicine, acupuncture, herbs for 4 decades now. And I worked in and out of her office growing up. And pretty much all I knew as she taught me was prevention and wellness, compassion, empathy, looking at the person, patient, beyond the signs and symptoms, and looking at them at a holistic approach. And so I went into medicine, just really marrying the two, East and West. But what I found was during my medical school training, which a lot of my colleagues share, is that you tend to realize that there wasn't enough, nutrition and lifestyle curriculum. And so having graduated, I made it a point to learn and go at a deeper dive with that. And so I enrolled myself into culinary school. In between medical school and residency. Residency is basically doctors in training. And I took that education to kind of enhance what I do. So I do family practice. So I pretty much see pretty much everyone from almost every age. And it's a very diverse field. And you're pretty much a primary care doc. And so I've used that education to kind of hold demonstrations, workshops. I speak at national conferences. And then in 2017, I launched my own, platform, my own website called TheChefDoc, and basically focusing on three things: culinary medicine, which is combining the science and arts of culinary arts and nutrition; lifestyle medicine, which is using evidence-based lifestyle approaches to treat, prevent, and reverse chronic lifestyle-related disease. And then something I call Thrive Medicine, which is basically, taking one's, particular life and elevating it to their next, level, just kind of, elevating your game type of deal. And so since then, I've written a book, I've launched a podcast last year, and now I'm here partnering with WellSet to give this very special talk.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Colin. It's amazing. My brother is actually in his 4th year of residency now. So to imagine him going to culinary school right before residency, it's so impressive that you were able to blend those two passions and seek after training in both. So that's wonderful. I think, it's a great time for us to get right into the workshop. So
my topic is pretty much using food to enhance, our mood, which is a play on words, obviously. And I would probably say, during this time in the pandemic, during our, global COVID crisis, a lot of people are feeling discouraged and disenchanted with mental health, right? Pretty much at an all-time high. Stress and anxiety levels are very, very elevated. And obviously so, and very warranted, right? You have a down economy. No matter who you voted for, it almost seems like leadership is, not entirely there. Our healthcare system has been really, wreaked havoc, on. And so it comes down to, how does food play into this, right? Well, when you look at, I look at my own subset of patients, and look at, patients and different people across the board. And not only do I look at mental health, but I also look at physical health, right? Because as a physician, we look at, things all inclusively. I'm actually not an MD, I'm a DO. And for those of you who don't know what a DO is, stands for Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine or Doctor of Osteopathy. And in its training, we specialize in terms of looking at the patient as a complete unit. So we won't look at a part of the body without considering the rest of the body. And so that has been taught to us, thoroughly throughout medical school. And combine that with my other experiences, you kind of have to look at things from a multi-pronged approach. And food has always been not just a hot topic per se, but it's something that we all intricately and intimately, have to, go through. We all eat, one time, 3 times, 3+ more times throughout the day. And it's not rocket science that what you put in your mouth may either feed disease or actually support your health. There's countless and mountain load of studies to, be able to show, both cases. So for me, when I looked at food, and when I went to culinary school, the whole purpose was just to kind of figure out, where does food, come into play, right? And, how does it come into play? And, what do we need to learn, to educate ourselves, to arm ourselves with those tools to be able to, take back our health, and I always say to my patients that, the biggest step that you can do to take back your health is to get back into the kitchen. And I say that because when you get into the kitchen, you pretty much know what's going on in your food. And, I'm not looking for you to be the next Food Network star or the next Michelin star chef or anything like that. It's really about simple ingredients, simple tools, and simple techniques, right? So, getting yourself a good cutting, good knife, chef knife, a good cutting board, having a few, pots and pans, and having a few, key ingredients, in your fridge and in your cupboard or pantry is a good, starting place. But yeah, getting back to mental health, it's very obvious that, people are really stressed, and rightfully so. You have everyone being more indoors, right? Not being, out in the workplace if you are a non-essential worker. And you are faced with different changes in your lifestyle. Not only are you, a worker, now you are needing to be a teacher. And then not only that, you are, spending so much time with that significant other, or spending so much time by yourself, or spending so much time with your children, or your, in-laws. And that could also draw lots of varying amounts of stress. And then when you are stressed, what do? We look for things of comfort. So we'll emotionally eat, we'll stress eat, we'll look for comfort foods. But also, it's not rocket science that they may or may not, feed disease or support our health. So I'll kind of stop right there just to kind of see if there's like any questions in the audience, if things don't make sense, or, you, Rosa, if you have any questions yourself.
Thanks so much for opening up this conversation with that. I want to turn to the audience and see if there are any questions so far. If you want to use the chat, you're also welcome to come up on audio and ask a question. All you have to do is raise your hand. There's a button at the bottom of the window that you should be able to click, and then I can enable your audio. But Colin, I think a good place to start is, I think some of what we were thinking about touching on is mental health and also on immunity. So maybe we can start with one of those topics and see
Sure.
how we can use food to support either of them, especially as, summer unfortunately is coming to a close and we're coming into the fall season. How
Definitely.
can we, defend ourselves in the kitchen
Yeah.
and use foods to nourish us?
Yeah, definitely. So if you see my shirt move, it's not a ghost, it's a fan. So, so yeah, so the gut health, immunity, what can we do to protect ourselves has been a hot topic, right? I would like to kind of reframe that. And that's actually, good that we're raising awareness, right? Because the virus is, it's blind to everyone. It just attacks, right? It doesn't matter what color, you are. It doesn't matter what you believe in. It doesn't matter, all these different things, right? And just a few weeks ago, I even saw the first documented dog death that passed away from COVID. So it's even, reaching to other species as well. So it's very rightfully so that people ask, what can we do to protect our health, right? And I'm more of a person that looks for the silver lining of things. And so, I would reframe this question in terms of, what do I eat or consume in terms of protecting our health or immunity just to ward off viruses, as opposed to optimizing your overall health? Because as you'll see, there's actually a lot of overlaps, So in general, just kind of like a 101 with gut health is, and immunity, is that, your digestive tract, starts from your mouth and goes all the way to the bottom end, right? There's no other pathway in and out, right? So what you feed yourself is super, super, super important. And the reason why is because, your immune system is basically kind of like our defense system, for our body, it's our army, it's our Marines, it's our Navy, it's our Air Force, it's the special ops, it's, the super soldiers, and we have different types of components and cells and antibodies that make up this immune system. For those of you who don't know, up to 70% of our immune system actually lives within our gut. And what I mean by gut is, pretty much your digestive tract, that, portion, below your chest, right? And not only that, it actually helps us fight off different bacteria, parasites, fungi, viruses on a daily basis. So it's not just COVID, it's everything else that you don't actually feel or know, because it does this automatically. It's the same thing in terms of breathing. It's the same thing in terms of blinking. It's the same thing in terms of your heart beating. These things happen automatically, I'm saying, without you being, conscious of it. And it's the same thing with your immune system. It's fighting every single day to ward off. So what determines whether you have a stronger immune system and what you do not is based off of, a large part is what you eat and your environmental factors, your stress response, your weight, indulging or consuming, risky, substances or behaviors. That all influences, our health and our immune system. In terms of our gut health, there's something called the microbiome, right? And to be able to, I feel like being a physician, a lot of times you kind of have to play the person to translate, the actual medical lingo. And micro means, something very, very, very small that we have to use, a microscope with. A biome, biome, is basically a self-contained ecosystem, similar to how the rainforest is an ecosystem to all the different diverse animal species, in the Amazon, for example, right? So the microbiome is basically a self-contained ecosystem of microorganisms, and that includes your bacteria, viruses, parasites, fungi, things like that. What you may not know is that, we have up to around 39 trillion microorganisms living inside of us. And that's almost a 9 to 10 to 1 ratio of actual cells in our body. So in essence, we're actually more 90% bacteria of, microorganisms than we are, cells, what I'm saying? So you could say that we're just a walking, we're just a walking bacteria, a walking, cesspool, and one important thing is what you put in your mouth determines the diversity of that microbiome. So the microbiome is a kind of like, if you think about like a pool, right? If you think about like a large pool and you think about, good bacteria and bad bacteria, what you eat, how diverse your food is, the variety of it determines, how that ratio of good and bad bacteria are. It's never going to be all good or all bad. It's going to be what is going to be more of the overwhelming tipping point of either one. And what determines that is what you eat, right? So what you eat, if we look at the standard American diet, the standard American diet is heavy in meat, fried foods, processed food, refined carbohydrates, fried foods, things that are heavier in protein, fat, salt, calories. Fat, I mean like saturated fat, trans fat, mostly from processed and animal-based foods, and very, very low in fiber. Okay, so before I talk about fiber, what animal-based foods does is a number of things, right? So if you're a omnivore, if you are a carnivore, if you eat, a lot of animal-based foods, what you're consuming is many, many different kinds of components besides just protein, right? You'll consume things, so one is you're consuming a lot of saturated fat and trans fat, which are highly documented to, lead towards cardiovascular disease, right? You'll consume things in animals that, plant foods don't have, right? I'll like to split this topic up between animals and plants. So animals have something called heme iron. Heme iron is something that is more of a pro-oxidant. And pro-oxidants are basically something that leads towards oxidative reaction or oxidative stress. And then you can think of this as like the rusting process to like a car. You know that a car is, you eventually will rust out, right? And so, think of your body like a car. You know that the body will eventually rust out. Different from a car is that we can always get a new car, buy a new car, lease a car, whatever, exchange, right? But we can't do that with our bodies, maybe in the near future, who knows? But in the meantime, we can't do that to our bodies. So what we like to strive to do is to be able to delay that onset of the oxidative process, delay that rusting process, right? And so you can do this with food. So with animal-based foods, what we find with studies is that, the components of food is not only do the saturated fat and trans fat, leads towards cardiovascular disease, it increases a lot of inflammation. So the inflammation is, like I said, like the heme iron, depending on how the animal was raised or processed, it has a lot of bad bacteria. I mean, it's not, newsflash for people to hear, your produce, going bad or being recalled, or, this type of meat is being recalled, or, some fast food restaurant has some sort of food poisoning, or picnics, things like that. So it comes with a lot of bad bacteria as well. And bad bacteria produces a lot of toxins that is detrimental to the health, right? Animal-based foods is also deficient of fiber, okay? Fiber is basically the digestible roughage that you find in plant food only. There's no fiber that, comes with animal-based foods, right? And the reason why that's important is that, fiber, which I'll go into with plant food, is that fiber is basically what we call the prebiotic to the probiotic. You'll probably hear these buzzwords here and around. So you'll have the microbiome, which has good bacteria and bad bacteria, and you need to have a healthy diversity. So how do you have a healthy diversity? By eating things that are richer in probiotics and foods that are richer in prebiotics. So fiber is kind of like the roughage, the non-digestible material. And it's important to, have a lot of that to bulk up your stools, to have good bowel movements. Fiber protects, you from colon cancer. I just literally had a podcast episode where I interviewed a gastroenterologist on my podcast talking about colon cancer in light of Chadwick Boseman, the star of Black Panther, who passed away from colon cancer. And so fiber helps to enhance all that, right? So fiber is a prebiotic, right? So prebiotics would be, for example, like beans and oats, bananas, berries, garlics, onions, things like that. And it feeds, it's food for the good bacteria. And when you have a higher ratio or higher diversity of good bacteria versus bad, it helps to protect, the gut, enhance your immune system, protects your overall gut function, helps you digest well, right? Because what ends up happening is that fiber gets turned into something called, it gets fermented by the good bacteria into something called short chain fatty acids. I'm sorry if the lingo is too much, and I know a lot of information is being thrown at you, but let me know if you have any questions with it. But short chain fatty acids are the key players and components in building up your gut, your immune system. Okay. So the more fiber you consume, the better, right? People who consume more of an American diet have anywhere between like 15 grams of fiber consumed a day, whereas most organizations would recommend upwards of like 30. And for those in the plant-based community would recommend 40 plus, right? My recommendations is that there's no limits to this, right? In terms of fiber and what you consume. And fiber is mostly from plant food, vegetables and fruits and nuts and seeds and legumes and whole grains. That's what I'm referring to in terms of plant food, okay? Let me stop right there to see if there's any questions so far.
Colin, thank you so much. I think the terminology is great. It's so awesome to get into the specifics of this and learn about something I think many of us are really new to with the fatty acids. We do have a few questions. I'm going to start with a question from Maria, and she asks, are there certain foods you recommend during this time of increased stress?
Yeah. So, we're talking exactly that, so number one, I approach things in a root cause approach. So instead of putting a Band-Aid on every symptom and every issue that comes up on the surface, it's really about, where do the things come from? So your question is stress, right? So the number one question I would ask is, where does your stress come from? Where is the overall cause? Most of how we practice Western medicine is, kind of like turning on the faucet of a sink and the water overflowing onto the floor. And when you throw drugs and medications and procedures and surgery at it, what you're essentially doing is mopping up the floor and not turning off the faucet. And so when you're looking at, the pillars of health, food, diet, nutrition, physical fitness, stress management, weight management, avoiding smoking, avoiding alcohol or moderating alcohol, and reinforcing your relationships, they all contribute, not just for stress, but also for your overall health and delaying that rust process, that I was talking about, So the question is, what is, where does the stress come from, and how do you, mitigate it as, much as possible? So in terms of foods, like I said, it's, you want to be able to eat things that are contributing towards. So going back to the gut health portion of it, and I promise I'll answer that question, is that the gut health and the microbiome, if you eat more poor nutrient, dense foods, so foods that are less in nutrients, you are creating an environment within your gut and microbiome that influences hormones, which are basically chemical signals, neurotransmitters that are also chemical signal pathways. And our gut health is also very connected to our brain health. And there's a highway that goes up and down. And the diversity of your microbiome influences that. So instead of giving you straight answers in terms of this food and this food and this food, it's more about understanding why certain food groups play into that and what causes, what we face: depression, anxiety, insomnia, brain fog, PTSD, OCD, things like that, they all, have a lot of contributions to how we've, been raised, the trauma that we face, different environmental factors, and also in terms of foods, right? So I would say, in general, foods to shoot for would be things that are higher in diversity of plant foods and fiber, right? So in terms of plant foods, I would recommend, things that are, so plant foods as in like vegetables, fruits, grains, whole grains, nuts and seeds, legumes, beans, peas, things like that. So those are the big categories, right? When you break it down, even further, you want to stick towards, foods that have higher concentration of fiber, and foods that have are lower on the glycemic index, in terms of, carbohydrates. What the glycemic index is, and you probably have heard of it before, it's categorized and stratified into like high, medium, and low, right? Um, Basically, the glycemic index basically measures how much a certain food breaks down into glucose in your system. And so higher glycemic index foods are like white flour, white pasta, white potatoes, processed and refined carbohydrates, sugar, artificial sweeteners, things like that, Medium glycemic index foods would be like orange juice, honey, whole grain breads, things like that. Lower glycemic index foods would be like berries, whole grains, complex, vegetables like, sweet potatoes, things like that, berries, also whole grains as well, beans, legumes. And they found with studies is that, when you eat more lower glycemic index foods, okay, the better you'll be able to stay off, depression and anxiety, okay? And not only that, refined and processed foods is, if you think about it, what are you doing with processing and refining foods? You're stripping out pretty much all the components that Mother Nature put together in the first place. So a good rule of thumb that I tell my patients is that if it didn't come off of a vine, come out of the ground, or off of a tree like that, then it's probably best to minimize it, right? So if you, for example, if I tell people to shop in a supermarket, I would tell them to shop around the perimeter of the supermarket. And the reason why is because the live foods, the things that keep food alive is with refrigeration. And that's only on the perimeter of the supermarket. If you look at the middle of the supermarket, everything is in a shelf, right? So how do people keep things on a shelf? Preservative, chemicals, binders, all kinds of additives. God knows what they do to our bodies over time if you consume in large amounts over time, right? So it's not actually real food. I like to call them food-related products. So I would opt for foods around the perimeter of the market, more. And if you think about it, real food doesn't actually have a nutrition label, And if you have to consume foods with a nutrition label or out of a container or box, I would shoot for, ingredients that are, 5 or less, right? And shoot for ingredients that you can pronounce. If you can't pronounce it, chances are it's probably not a good idea to put in your body. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know if that makes sense. And I'll just like stop right there to see if there's other questions.
Thank you, Colin. We have a follow-up to this question from Carrie, and she asks, which plant foods are prebiotic and which ones are probiotic?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so probiotics is, I think the common probiotic people think of is like yogurt, right? Which can be considered a probiotic because it has active cultures, right? So probiotic is basically a certain type of food that a bacteria could live off of and thrive in. So yogurts are cultured with good bacteria, right? But it also, yogurt is, comes from a dairy protein, right? There are actually a lot of yogurts that are made from coconut milk and almond milk and different types of non-dairy. So you can have yogurt that doesn't come from a dairy if you're considering, not going the dairy route, okay? Other probiotic foods would be like fermented foods. So, kimchi, from Korean foods, right? Miso, right, which is a Japanese staple, which is used to, put as a base for like soups and stews, and, things like that. Natto, which is basically derived from like soybeans. Kombucha, kefir, sourdough, sourdough bread sometimes, is also made with like, certain type of yeast to leaven, and also certain cheeses as well. But again, cheeses and dairy, are also an animal-based protein, so, that also comes with, it's also cost as well. So if you look at the Mediterranean style, type of cooking, or the Mediterranean like pattern of cooking, they've done a lot of studies where, those types of people have very low rates of anxiety and depression. And when they looked at, Mediterranean foods, they're heavy in what? They're heavy in fruits and vegetables. They're heavy in nuts and seeds. They consume a lot of olive oil, which is healthy for its omega-3s, right? Omega-3s are very good for our support, for our, fat, distribution. We, in our bodies, we have omega-3s, 6s, and 9s, okay? In the American style type of dieting, in terms of, what we eat as Americans, we are more heavy in omega-6s. And so it's also a game of balance. So when you're heavier in 6s, you are going to have more of an environment within your body that's going to be more inflammatory. And when you have something that's more inflammatory, you're going to set yourself up for more chronic diseases like diabetes, cancer, heart disease, strokes, things like that. Not just omega-6s, but other types of markers of inflammation as well. So omega-3s come from, olive oil. They come from other types of, vegetables as well. For example, like, but also it's very predominant in cold water fish. That's why, a lot of fish oil has been touted. A lot of, they say Mediterranean's great because they eat a lot of fish. But the caveat with fish, unfortunately, is that, our waters are very polluted. We throw a lot of trash in the water. We have a plastic issue. We have a heavy metal issue. And when you look at the food chain in the fish, it's like the small fish will eat the big fish will eat the small fish, the bigger fish will eat that fish, and all those, whatever they consume will end up in their fat cells, So, and we eat fish for their meat, right? And so you're also consuming what they have absorbed in their cells. So my caveat with fish is, I would eat it in moderation. I would eat it in, close, wild caught, far reaches from, civilization as possible. And don't heavily rely on it just for omega-3s. They actually did a lot of studies with using fish oil supplements, and they don't really, in terms of like cardiovascular health, it doesn't really do much, okay? But omega-3s do support mental health in terms of depression and anxiety as well. So probiotics, prebiotics is basically the fiber, like we said, beans, legumes, onions, garlic, things like that. And let me see what else. Omega-3s, we talked about fats. There's also like minerals and vitamins and antioxidants, right? Those are predominantly found in, plant food. So antioxidants like vitamin A, C, E, those help, ward off, chronic diseases, help protect our brain health to be able to stave off, certain mental disorders, and helps protect our nervous system, So eating, a diet, richer in vitamin C, A, and E, which happens to be also in plant food, helps us as well. And also antioxidants. Antioxidants is the opposite of, free radicals. Free radicals are basically the components that, provoke more, food, more pro-inflammatory food, more of the rusting process, like I said. Antioxidants are found where? More in plant food. So like I said in the beginning of the talk, a lot of these things actually overlap. So it's hard to kind of get away from that notion that, because there's a there's a pill for every ill. I don't want you to think about food as there's a food for every ill, because food, when eaten more plant predominantly and more of its whole food complexity, it actually helps many, many different conditions, not just our mental health, so.
Thank you, Colin. That's extremely helpful. And we have a bunch of follow-up questions to what we just talked about. So we have a few questions from Alice asking, what do your daily and weekly meals look like? Are you plant-based? And then I'm going to combine it with another question from Maria asking, if you're going to use sugar as an occasional treat, which do you recommend?
Good questions. Good questions. So I personally have been plant-based for 6 years. I actually turned plant-based after my first marathon in New York City. And one of the main reasons why I turned plant-based was because the science and the health information and the evidence was too overwhelming to just really unsee something, and being a primary care doctor and being, I really care about, being a role model and, practicing what you preach. And, so I decided to give it a go. Before my marathon, the training was just very rigorous. I had a lot of joint pain, knee pain, back pain, things like that. After I finished my marathon, I still continued to race. I'm a triathlete. I run and cycle, 3 to 4 or 5 times a week. And I really, remain active. And so for those in the audience that, are, weekend warriors, fitness, people, athletes, you guys know that what you put in your body, how you hydrate, the amount of stress really can determine how well you recover, whether you can compete or not, or whether you'll make a certain weight class, right? And so it's the same thing. So when I turned to plant-based, I saw the differences in terms of how I recovered, in terms of my physical performance. I'm Chinese, my heritage is Chinese, and I grew up eating Chinese food. Both my parents cooked. And, difference with Chinese cuisine is that it's very balanced. Chinese Asian cooking is very balanced. We definitely take the yin and yang, to heart. We definitely take harmony and balance into that. And so we have equal amounts of like meats and vegetables and, grains and things like that. And so the transition wasn't that difficult. So I've been plant-based. Been doing that for 6 years. Trying to remember the other questions. What is my daily and weekly routine? So my daily and weekly routine is, I pick certain days in terms of meal prepping. And I, for example, if I work like a Monday through Friday, I would meal prep for, Sunday evenings or whatever the day works best for you. And I would look at it, and this could also work in a pandemic because, you're feeding other people, right? Or you're just feeding yourself. So to be able to ward off the impulse eating, the emotional eating, things like that, is to have healthy food ready to go. And you can do that by meal prepping. So cooking is not actually the hardest part. It's actually the meal preparation. And so, making sure, so when I meal prep, I make two different meals. I generally eat twice a day because I actually don't eat breakfast. I do intermittent fasting, which is an entirely different topic. So I only eat twice a day. And so that has, when I meal prep, I'll come up with, 2 different recipes. And then during the week, to, not get bored of the same thing, I'll cook like once or twice, in the middle of the week. And I like to, make recipes or approach recipes that are very simple. If I can get other kitchen appliances to help me out, why not? You know what I'm saying? So I make use of, a blender, a Vitamix, a slow cooker, a convection oven, things like that, to be able to lessen the load. I have a lot of patients that don't like to cook, and I get that, If you are in the supermarket, a lot of the supermarkets now have prepared ingredients that cuts down on the cooking time. Of course, those are more expensive, right? But if you feel like that's a cost worth paying, then go ahead. Another thing I would recommend is, so you have the produce aisle, you have the prepared meals, right? Definitely look at the ingredients. I would definitely look at, foods in bulk, buying things in bulk to lower down costs. I would look at frozen foods, right? And the reason why finding things in bulk and frozen foods is not only save money in terms of costs, but they also, frozen foods is great because they are actually picked at peak of nutrition, right? And they're flash frozen, right? And, I use a lot of that, especially when I'm trying to not actually make as many grocery runs and exposing myself to people and vice versa. So I make a lot. So I'll shop literally for enough food for 3 to 4 weeks. I kid you not. And it is a heavier price tag, but if you break it down per week, it comes up to almost about even. And it will last longer. Pretty much a third of what we actually buy as Americans is actually thrown away. And that's because we buy things that, we don't end up like using immediately or as soon as possible. When you have a fridge, how you set up a fridge is also important. So you have to be able, if you can't see a certain item in your fridge, you're not going to know it's there, right? So for common fridges with the freezers on top and the fridge on bottom, that, you have to dip down and kind of look at things, right? If you have fridges that are, the fridge is on the top and the freezer's on the bottom, those are better because things are at eye level. Learning how to store things properly, that also comes into play. So for me, when I buy, food, I buy a combination of maybe like 25%, a third for fresh produce that I'll consume within the week. And frozen foods, things in bulk, cans, things like that. Those are going to be like more by 2/3. So I'll use those foods. I'm more of a savory guy. It depends on your palate, right? So I'll make a lot of soups and stews, and I'll batch cook. Batch cooking means like you're preparing 2 to 3 meals, or 2 to 3 times more meals than you would make for that one sitting. So that way your efforts is one time, but you produce 3 to 4 times, as much meals. So you can apply that as if you're, cooking for a family. So if you're living alone, pretend you're cooking for a family, right? Slow cookers, do a great job in terms of making heavier meals, getting soup pots. Vitamix are great in terms of, actually cooking meals, but also, cooking smoothies, right? And having everything there. I'm not really a big fan of juicing. Juicing, you're removing a lot of fiber, all the roughage that you're taking out. Sure, you have the vitamins and minerals and antioxidants within the juice, but you need the fiber to actually metabolize and slow that release of glucose in your system. That's why lower glycemic index foods do better because they have more fiber attached to them, and your body is able to metabolize, and you're not having those sugar spikes, all day long, and you're not thereby reaching for something else. I think that answers the question, right?
And I just wanted to touch back on 2 points. The first one, we were talking about prebiotics. I was wondering if there's any way to like overdo prebiotics. Is there any sort of limitation on if you if you want to start incorporating kimchi into your diet or more yogurt? Is there like a maximum amount of prebiotic that you should be aware of? Or is it just sort of like, being mindful of only having one portion a day? What's your recommendation for that?
Yeah. So in terms of prebiotics, like I said before, prebiotic is basically food for the good, bacteria, right? For all the microorganisms. And that comes down to fibers. So for me, there's no limit in terms of how much fiber you can intake to have a very healthy microbiome, definitely upwards to like 40 grams, I would recommend. I'm going to teach you the concepts of calorie and nutrient dense foods. So when you eat more plant food, you're going to have more nutrient dense food, right? So what that means is nutrient dense in terms of vitamins and minerals and antioxidants and, fiber, all that good stuff. Calorie dense food is what we typically as Americans eat. things that are, higher in calories, like the processed foods, the sugary foods, the alcohol, just high in calories, fat, fried foods, things like that, the animal-based foods, but very low in nutrients. And if you take the same amount of calories, let's just say 500 calories of, the standard American diet versus 500 calories of, nutrient dense foods or plant food, if you look at a graph, they take up a very different portion of your stomach. I don't have that picture in front of me, but eat more nutrient dense foods, it takes up literally the entire, stomach. And that actually increases your satiety levels and helps you to decrease the amount of other foods that you're going to take. When you're, for example, eating 500 calories of oil, for example, right? I don't know why someone would do that, but if you eat a lot of fatty foods, right, it takes up a very small portion of your stomach. And the stomach relies on many different factors in terms of whether you need to eat more or not, right? There's a lot of chemicals and a lot of hormones that go back and forth to signal our brain, we need to eat more. So when it's not stretching that stomach, your body thinks it's still hungry and you need to eat more. So what are you going to do? You're going to consume more calories, consume more fats. That increases your likelihood of being obese or overweight, which, I'm sorry to say, almost 40% of Americans are obese or overweight now. And it's a very, very sad statistic because obesity, is associated with everything else: cancer, high blood pressure, diabetes, the list goes on and on, not just for mental health. So it's very important, in terms of understanding these concepts, and not only that, it's also important to understand how foods are prepared, right? We talked about the quality of foods, but we don't talk about, how they're prepared. So another reason why, eating, in your kitchen or preparing foods in your kitchen is important is because you know how you're preparing it. You know what's going into your food. When you're eating out of your household, whether it's takeout, restaurant food, fast food, ordering in, you're basically outsourcing your food to someone else. And the question is, are those people looking after your health? No, they're looking at the bottom line. They're looking at, their wallets, their business profits, So in order to reduce costs, they're going to do what? They're going to, find the cheapest, most cost-effective ingredients to make the food. But that doesn't mean it's going to be healthy for, your overall, health, So that's also another thing to keep in mind. In terms of cooking preparation, techniques in general, techniques that are more wet preparation as opposed to more dry preparation is healthier. So things like boiling, broiling, stewing, steaming, those are healthier preparations as opposed to dry heat. So dry heat in terms of, frying, grilling, charring something. The reason why it's unhealthier, it's because it's accelerating, that aging process within our bodies. So when you have things that are more black or more brown, or the crispiness that we love, in terms of fried foods and French fries, you're actually ingesting components and inflammation to accelerate the rusting process within your body. And not only that, those kinds of food creates the imbalance of diversity in your microbiome, in your gut health, right? Which thereby influences, how you're going to get certain diseases, most importantly, how it influences our mental health, So I hope that answers the question.
We have one question from Jay, which starts with, please discuss anti-nutrients. If consuming foods with anti-nutrients which interfere with supplement absorption, how long should one wait between eating those foods and taking supplements?
So if I interpret this correctly, and I'm not sure if there's a phrase called anti-nutrients, but I think what you're trying to say is what you're consuming that kind of inhibit, I guess, the nutrition that you're being, giving to. So the question is that what kind of foods to avoid, or what kind of, foods, you would, kind of not eat to be able to facilitate you digesting and absorbing supplements, if I interpret that question correctly. The first question is, why are you supplementing? And, what are you supplementing, right? So supplements, if you break down the word, is to supplement or support something else that is primary, right? A secondary to a primary. So for me, the primary predominantly needs to come from real food, whole food, plant-based, you know what I'm saying? Plant predominant. And a supplement is only really needed, if, to support, right? So supplements that I would recommend is, whether you're a meat eater or a plant eater, is vitamin B12, right? So B as in boy, 12, and vitamin D as in dog, right? So B12 is actually created from microorganisms in the soil, right? So when you have animal-based foods like cows and chickens and pigs, they're eating off of the ground, grass, things like that. So they're consuming B12 like that. Plant eaters, we get our B12 from the soil because of how the produce is harvested, right? But the problem is that the soil is nowadays, in terms of agriculture, is being cleansed too thoroughly. We're using, too many like cleaning products. We're using a lot of chlorine. And so you're actually killing a lot of the microorganisms. Thereby, you're not having the microorganisms create the B12 that we need, right? And so I would supplement with B12. I would recommend 2,500 micrograms, mcgs, once per week. Our body actually has a very good capacity in terms of storing B12. In addition, I would supplement with vitamin D. D, we get from the sun, and very, very, low amounts in terms of food. So I would say, 20, 30 minutes out in the sun will get you more than enough, units within your body to be able to, get your needs. But I also would supplement with vitamin D. The reason why is because we're a society of indoor creatures. If you think about it, we live in a box, we drive in a box, and then we go and work at a box. And, what are we doing? We're shielding ourselves. And when you're going out, you're using sunscreen. You're blocking rays from converting that vitamin D within your system. So inevitably, you need to get vitamin D. I would recommend 2,000 IU units a day. And that's from like D3, So I actually have an Amazon store page. So, and I have like recommendations. So if you go to my website, you could, find the links to be able to find these items there as well. So I hope that answers the question.
Focus on one last point. And given that this is National Suicide Prevention Week, and we, have rising health rates in the country, I think it would be nice to just touch in on following up on the omega-3s. And are there any other particular foods other than omega-3s, or taking like a fish supplement, that you would recommend implementing into our own diets that might help us in the same ways that taking fish oil or having more fish in our diet would help us?
Yeah. So basically, to kind of, recap everything, is my overall takeaway point for you guys, if you were to take away anything, is just to eat more plants, right? And as close to Mother Nature and as close to in its whole form, as possible. We talked about, foods that are probiotics. So things that are fermented, active cultures, like we said, so like tempeh and miso, sauerkraut, kimchi, things like that. Yogurt, kefir, things like that. Prebiotics, which is basically the roughage and fiber within a lot of plant foods, that you'll get. So you can get this in like beans, legumes, dark leafy greens. Vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, vitamins A, C, and E, help support our immune system. Minerals like iron, magnesium, potassium, There's a lot of foods, that have that as well. Dark leafy greens, tofu, soybeans have this. Magnesium can also be a supplement. But you know, mineral supplements, I would kind of confer with your, healthcare provider in terms of, that I always recommend getting these minerals from plant foods, omega-3s. Omega-3s can be found, can be found within plant food. It's just lower amounts. So you can find them in like algae derived, foods, seeds, things like that. A lot of omega-3s do come from cold water fatty fish, which is predominantly what you'll see in an aisle. It could probably take up the entire aisle. But again, a lot of studies, show that, in terms of cardiovascular health, it doesn't really do anything. And then also you have to be mindful of, the fish that you're consuming it from, and it's not as simple as, oh, I'm just going to get this omega-3s. You're also ingesting, whether it's the fish or the supplements, all the other things that the fish ate in its lifetime, so just think about, just research, the food, how dirty and how trash our waters are. And not only that, we overfish, we pollute our fish. If you buy fish that are farmed, the fish are only subjugated to what we give them for food. And a lot of times, we don't even give them what they naturally find in the environment, and it's the same thing with agriculture as well. So another thing is eating more low glycemic index foods, so things that, don't break down sugar, as fast. So staying away from, white flour, white potatoes, white pastas, white rice, things like that. And we haven't talked about sweeteners and artificial sweeteners. I forgot to answer that question. But if you want a sweetener, I would recommend molasses, date sugar, and honey. Okay. Well, molasses and date sugar predominantly more, because they have more nutrients and have more, fiber with them, as opposed to regular sugar, brown sugar, artificial sweeteners. Artificial sweeteners have, too many issues with the overall body. It increases your appetite, increases likes, increases your likelihood of being obese, because you're increasing appetite. And actually, they've done studies with artificial sweeteners that the more you consume, the more depressed and anxious you'll get, And then also in terms of spices and herbs, saffron, turmeric have, great antidepressant, anti-anxiety properties. Turmeric have those properties, but they also fight cancer as well. So if you include that in your cooking, oregano helps. Other herbs would be like lavender, chamomile. You can drink those in forms of teas. But yeah, I would say lean towards plants. And not only that, in terms of mental health, not just food. Make sure you're getting 150 minutes a day of exercise, whether that's indoors or outdoors. Making sure that you're fostering good relationships with people. Making sure that you manage your stress well. Do you breathe well? Do you hydrate? Do you sleep well? Do you avoid risky substances or behaviors? Do you smoke? Do you drink alcohol? So it's a very comprehensive approach to health. And as you can see, it's not like a one answer fits all. So, but if you guys want to learn more about me, I have a website at chefdoczhu.com, chefdoczhu.com. I do work with, WellSet in terms of, coaching sessions. So if those may be of, of use or interest to you or someone else, let us know. And, I can, offer a free, healthy living start guide. I'll provide a link for you to submit your email, with that as well, for those that are listening. And, I know the pandemic is very rough for a lot of us, and, and it looks like, there's no end in sight. So I would say, definitely keep your head up high. make sure you have a good support system, make sure you're treating yourself well, being kind to yourself, being kind to others, and making sure that, you know, you put good food into your system.